Good day and welcome back to another DB Legends video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at the green Legends Limited Piccolo and basically get a look at just how good he is in DB Legends. Now obviously he's one of the newer Legends Limited characters that has come out with part 2 of the anniversary, and he's pretty good. He has a transformation upon revival. And you can get some Legends Limited power for him by completing the newest stage of the Prevent World Domination event. In his base form, he is a pretty interesting yet probably unspectacular unit, whereas in his transform state, he becomes obviously much stronger. In his base state, he is essentially a support. He increases his damage of his allies, he restores his ki, and generally speaking, he's just probably what I would consider a solid unit. He has the ability to knock back opposition to long range if a cover change is formed against their strike arts attack. He applies debuffs to the enemy when changing cover, which includes things like reducing their card draw speed, reducing their strike and blast arts power, and reducing their special move power as well. Until he transforms, he's also just a relatively consistent unit without anything too spectacular. He can augment his card draw speed, essentially with his green card, and he also can do some decent damage with his special move. But there's nothing too obscure or too crazy about him, at least until he awakens. Now his awakening will only occur when he has his health reduced to 0. His health reducing to 0 is pretty much straightforward. The only thing that can prevent his revive is if his own health reaches 0 due to the enemy's self-destruct attack. So that's kind of the only limitation on his revive. Beyond that, it's pretty straightforward. Once he's transformed, that's where things get very interesting. Now, when he transforms, he becomes much less of a support-based unit. His main ability nullifies enemy special actions that activate when changing cover, which is really good for 10 timer counts. He all of a sudden gains a couple changes to his abilities. For example, he increases the enemy strike damage received with his strike arts cards, and increases their blast damage received with blast arts cards, which is pretty cool. His special move is relatively solid, which nullifies health restoration effects as well as increasing his damage done for 3 timer counts, and his green card for a short period of time will activate upon melee's tap action or strike arts that are performed against him by the opposition, and when it does activate his counter, he will nullify enemy destroy card effects and also nullify enemy special actions that activate when changing cover, which is pretty good. So he has cover nullification, he has health restoration nullification, and of course from his own abilities he has a very interesting unique gauge. Now this unique gauge is probably one of the best parts about Piccolo, and basically when his unique gauge activates or when it triggers, it does a whole bunch of effects. It restores his own health by 20%, it gives 30% to special move damage, it reduces the special move cost, it nullifies own unfavorable element factors, it cancels his abnormal conditions, destroys all your enemy's cards, reduces your enemy's ki by 50, reduces the enemy's Dragon Balls by 1, and seals all the enemy's main abilities for 10 timer counts. So basically, if he takes enough damage, he essentially just reduces your enemy's ability to fight to 0. That's kind of his big shtick. When he takes enough damage, he just reduces their fighting capabilities to 0, which in all matter of respects is really damn good. It's probably the strongest part about his kit, and it's a very good part about his kit. Honestly, there's just a ton of really good things about him, but I would honestly say that this ability to nullify all of these abilities and just completely ruin the opposition is really, really solid. In terms of his cards or his abilities, or in terms of his equipment, His equipment is pretty straightforward. Obviously, he's a strike unit. You want to give him some health. You need to give him health, especially for when he transforms. Although he becomes relatively tanky, it's not like he's perfectly tanky. And so what can happen is sometimes in the worst case scenario, you can be blown up before getting off your counter ability, which isn't ideal. Ideally, you want to get off your counter ability, so giving him relative tankiness is very good. He'll get his damage from combo buildup, so him having that strike damage increase, that blast damage increase is pretty good. Obviously, him being a strike unit is also quite imperative, at least from his performance standpoint. He does have strike more than blast, but not too significantly. He's actually quite even on both, which is obviously something that's very, very important. Especially in his transform state, his strike and blast arts cards are generally speaking quite similar, and his damage is quite similar in both. Now, one thing that I will state for Piccolo is obviously the Saga from the movies team is quite good. So you will find that generally speaking he performs quite well across the board, at least in terms of team. He has a lot of options, he is generally speaking quite consistent, and his revive is good because Saga from the movies, not that it lacked revives, but he kind of becomes a pseudo purple Gohan replacement, which I think at the end of the day is probably around about the best kind of application of him as a unit. Is just that like improved revive unit, because we do tend to end up with quite a few situations whereby we have, at least I would say, limited kind of access towards revival units that are effective in the meta per team. They can fade out quite significantly, and Piccolo, I think, comes in a situation where he is more so just very, very solid. He's not necessarily insane from the perspective of his overall kit. I think he's not the strongest unit in the game, for example. I don't think that's the case at all, but I do think he fulfills a very good role in terms of the team and just everything in general. I think he's very much a very, very solid unit that can fulfill that revival role and just be very, very, very solid on his team. A good tanky option. His counter is definitely his unique piece of his kit. How long it'll last just depends on how useful he'll remain in the other areas, because it's great that he can lock down a unit and really just kind of cause a huge amount of damage to them, but at the same time it's going to be a little bit of a problem if he can't still add value beyond that, because him locking down a unit is great. It doesn't really help us if he's locking down a unit but then doing nothing afterwards, which is ideally not where he stands, but is the only major concern factor that at least I have when it comes to Piccolo and his overall kit and capabilities. With that being said though, I do think Piccolo is an incredibly good unit. I think he sits in a situation where he isn't a unit that leaves me wanting too much more. Whereas I felt with Goku Frieza before their buff that they were a little bit too inconsistent, too fragile, too weak. Piccolo feels about right. He's not an ostensibly bad unit. I find him to be very good. He can still get nuked down. He can still not contribute a lot, which is the case with a lot of units now in the meta. Combo kills and things are very, very big. But what Piccolo does is he helps to counter that at least a little bit. He does do a very good job in terms of countering and just being consistent and just doing very good meta tempo control. Is it perfect tempo control? No. Obviously, it would be much better if he could activate his gauge twice, for example. But I think the fact that he completely kills the opposition momentum is just something that you can't really underestimate. At least from the perspective of Piccolo. I think it's just something that's so very, helps him excel so much in the current meta and just in the meta in general. Anytime a unit can completely kill the opposition's tempo, I just find it to be something that's very, very pivotal towards their good performance overall. I think if I could change a single thing about Piccolo, it would maybe be that in his transformed state, maybe up the damage a little bit. He doesn't feel distinctively OP damage-wise, so I think a little buff there wouldn't be too far out of the ordinary. At least, like not an actual buff, but just for me would have been fine. Or his tankiness. I feel like he's not distinctively tanky enough, nor is he offensively brilliant enough to be considered overwhelming. But that's also, I think, by design. Ideally, though, I think Piccolo's well built. I think he brings a good chunk to the table. He's a strike unit, but he's a very even unit in reality. He is a strike unit, but he's really just a two-way player. He can do blast, he can do strike. And really, it's his ability to nullify cover changes, break down tempo, and just completely disorientate the opposition that really brings him into the fold. That, along with some really, really strong performances from the general banner units, and just some, good counters to a strong purple meta. And I think Piccolo's in a good space. I think green is not as overwhelmed as it used to be. I think green units used to be essentially quite overwhelmed, especially with like how heavy Ultra, Goji the Blue kind of counted them. But I think now, with the way the current meta is, with the way everything's been framed, I think you can accept that Piccolo is, a very solid unit. And I think he's just incredibly reliable. I think he's very good. And I think at the end of the day, he's incredibly consistent with being a unit that's not broken. Is he bad? No. Is he good? Yes. Is he great? Yeah, I would say so. Is he broken? No. And I think that's a good design. I think Piccolo is not a unit that's going to be here 6 years and 6 months in the future at the same level he is. But I think he, in 6 months with a plat, he could be just as good. Just needs a little bit of tweaking with his stats. But you can see damage-wise, he can really bring some good damage. Tanking-wise, he can bring some decent tanking. But it's really that counteraction. You're going to see the way his gauge works. We're going to get hit now. And the problem is there. You could get hit by that. And if it kills Piccolo, the gauge, I believe, will not activate, which is the only real problem. And that means that you can't tempo control the opposition. So sometimes he can get whittled down a little bit. You can obviously redirect this by just, having better, having better items, having more health pool. Those sort of things will help you counteract this. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we are sitting in a situation where he's, not able to control the tempo of the match. And I think he's a good unit from that perspective. And he does a very good job. And you can see here, good damage again, very nice, good combo damage, good tempo control. We're going to get his green card off. It's a bit difficult to use, of course. You need to time it just right. But yeah, I think overall he's still a very fun unit. And what he brings to the table is more than enough for me. I think, I'm quite happy with what he brings. I think if you've got him, if you've managed to get him, then I think you're a person that's happy. I think, if you don't have him, then I think you're not ostensibly too upset without having him. He's kind of one of those units where he's either you enjoy having him or you're not too terrified of missing out on him, at least from my perspective. Of course, that can change. It can always change. I think, it's one of those things that people need to consider. But I think at the end of the day, he's still a very, very good unit, and he does do a very, very good job. But yeah, that's basically going to be it for me. Obviously, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think about Piccolo down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.